Is a better world possible? The challenges sometimes seem overwhelming. Billions of people have no access to education, health care, clean drinking water, or even basic human rights. Their poverty is compounded by corruption, conflict over resources, economic stagnation, and violence.
Some countries, whole generations of young people are being lost.
So the cycle goes on and on. So one has to break that cycle.
Where are the solutions? And who are the change makers who can create them? In the past few decades, a powerful force has emerged. New leaders finding new ways to tackle the world's biggest problems. Problems that governments and businesses alone have not been able to overcome.
This is a new language, a new way of looking at the world. Very different structure, different framework, different reference points.
This global revolution is led by social entrepreneurs, innovative people who respond to local problems, engage their communities in solving them, and accelerate change.
What has happened during the last 5 years is breathtaking.
People have the power of transformation.
This series is an opportunity to learn from the most extraordinary social entrepreneurs, people whose visionary ideas and persistence have enabled millions to transform their own lives. These founding members of Ashoka's Global Academy for Social Entrepreneurship have lessons to offer us all about the power of our own potential. They all started small, from humble beginnings. You are invited to share their journeys, learn their insights, and about the tools they use to produce change.
We have a window of opportunity of a couple of years.
It's the chance that we have to think ahead. The companies that get this are going to have a huge competitive advantage.
Whether you're in business, the media, government, universities, or the social sector, this series will expose you to a new way of thinking and working that will stretch your own beliefs about what's possible and how you can achieve it. BRAC, formerly the Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee, is the largest non-government organization in Bangladesh and in the world. Fazl Hassan Abed is its founder.
A country like Bangladesh with 130 million people, you need to have large-scale programs, otherwise you don't bring about any significant change.
BRAC's 30,000 staff members serve over 4 million members with healthcare, nutrition, microfinance, legal aid, and other services. Over 1 million children attend BRAC's non-formal primary schools, and only 20% of its work is funded by donors.
There's a market perspective in everything, including even in development programs. You'll find that there is thinking about whether we want to do this at this cost or something alternative at that cost. These are being looked at all the time.
Abed shares with us his views on why it's so vital to think big, how to properly lay the groundwork, how to guide the process, how to employ important checks and balances. He demonstrates the importance of involving everyone to work toward a single, higher goal.
In the 70s, there was a book by Schumacher, or Small is Beautiful. It encapsulated a thinking about any program which is big is not very good. I mean, small is beautiful. It was somewhat a Gandhian kind of principles that big means a big factory where people are dehumanized. Small is beautiful in the sense that you do things, you produce things yourselves and so on. But we felt that in terms of development programs, whatever you do in Bangladesh, if it is too small, it's insignificant, it doesn't solve the problem of Bangladesh. And we decided that if you want to tackle poverty of the country like Bangladesh with 130 million people, you need to have large-scale programs. Otherwise, you don't bring about any significant change. So that became our motto, that small is beautiful, but large scale is absolutely essential in Bangladesh. If you look at the first 8 years of BRAC, after 1980, we had 300 staff. And by 1990, the next 10 years, we had about 3,000 staff. By the year 2000, the next 10 years, we had grown to about 20,000. And now we have more than 30,000 staff, and we are adding probably about 5,000 staff every year. BRAC works in microfinance, where we have got 4.2 million borrowers. And this year we have lent about $450 million. We are working in developing agriculture, livestock, fisheries. We have programs in education. We are providing primary education to 1.2 million children. I think the first thing, of course, when you want to go to scale, you must be determined to bring about change in a significant way. I have found that not many development organizations think big, think national. That's the biggest problem, I think. When I started BRAC, I didn't have any notion that BRAC will become the largest non-governmental organization in the world. Our idea was that we will work in small pilot projects, and that expansion and replication will be done by other entities. We got the idea of national replication once we developed our program in oral rehydration, where we visited all the houses in Bangladesh, and we felt confident that we could replicate our programs. Whatever we did, we could go national. But I think the essential elements of BRAC is that whatever we do it in a small scale first. Test it out. It must be first effective, whatever you're doing. And then once you are effective, then you try to become efficient. By that I mean that you routinize the tasks which are essential and discard those which are inessential. So you become effective and efficient. Once you are effective and efficient, then and then only you can start expanding. And that's what has happened in BRAC. For example, when we started our oral rehydration program, we started in one thana with 30,000 families, and we tried to be effective. And then once we have done that, we started expanding. But not all programs in BRAC are expanding at the same kind of pace. There are still vast numbers of programs which are still in small scale. Let me give you an example. We have just tested a model of training women members of union councils. Union councils are the lowest tier of the local government. And the government has decided that 3 members of the local government must be women. And we felt that these women were elected, but not being provided opportunities to function. So we started in one district, all the women members of the Union Council, we started training them as to their responsibilities, their authority, and the kind of work that they can do. So we have just trained one group of people, and they are wonderfully effective. So this is a pilot, but we'll probably go to scale in the next 2 to 3 years. But it takes about 3 to 4 years to develop a program before one thinks in terms of going to scale with it. And I think, meanwhile, you also need to develop all the other infrastructures to go to scale. Capacity to get your training department effectively in place, your logistics department in place, your accounting department in place. You have to get the internal audit, the monitoring department in place before you can go to scale. So basically you have to think through all the other management systems which would be needed to control a large-scale program. In BRAC we have got an internal audit department which has got about 70 people. We have 2 kinds of monitoring that goes on. One is independent monitoring, which doesn't report to program heads, reports to head of audit and monitoring. So they are independent. And then another group of people who are within the project, but they're program monitoring, so managers understand what's going on. So we have both. And then, of course, research is completely independent, and they can come out with any results of programs, which sort of informs us as to how we are doing. So I think most organizations don't do that very effectively. We discovered that about a quarter of our children died before their 5th birthday. And we also knew that half of them died from diarrhea, 252 per 1,000. And we felt that we needed to do something about that. But BRAC was still a small organization at that time. We had about 300 people. We decided that since BRAC was the kind of organization which knows how to go to rural areas and how to transmit information and transmit knowledge, the best thing would be to go and teach every person, every one woman in every household, how to make oral rehydration fluid at home. If they could do that at home, then they will not be dependent on my marketed product, which will cost them something. So initially we thought that we should first test it. So the first 30,000 households were done, and we sent out a monitoring team. We found only 6% of the households were using oral rehydration therapy. We found out that some of the oral rehydration workers themselves were not using oral rehydration for when they had diarrhea. They went to rural pharmacies and bought drugs which sort of stops diarrhea, which is dangerous actually. So we brought all our oral rehydration workers back to basically teach them exactly how oral rehydration worked in the body. So once they were convinced that their teaching improved, then we did another monitoring for the next 30,000 households which were taught. And we found that it went up to 18%. Then, of course, we fielded our research team. They found out that most women who didn't use oral rehydration told them that our husbands, our men in the households, don't like it. Since our entire program was focused on teaching women, we had completely ignored men in the households. So after that, of course, our program also included meetings with men. And also we went into mosques, village markets. So that seemed to have worked quite well. But how do we know that the women who are transmitting this knowledge is doing it properly? If it is not properly done, and women were making solutions which were too much salt, it could be dangerous for the child. So we decided that we would break down the knowledge transmission to 10 points. We'll pay our oral rehydration worker on the basis of retention of knowledge and the quality of oral rehydration solution made by the woman. So 1 month after the women taught these households, a group of monitors will go in and check 10% of the households as to how many of the 10 points that they remembered and whether they can make the oral rehydration solution. The solution made by the woman would be taken to a laboratory and tested. So that improved quality dramatically. But then how do we know that the monitors who are monitoring them were doing the right thing? So we devised a system. We wanted our oral rehydration worker to write down the name of the youngest member of the household that they visited. And that information was not available to the monitor, the youngest person's name. And then that part of it was taken care of. The monitors ensured that they went to the household, found out the name of the youngest person in the household. We always matched that. So that created a very high quality program. And then initially we covered 1/4 of the household, first 3 years, and then the next 3 years, another quarter of the household. And in the last 4 years, we took up the rest of the country. When we were doing the last half of the country, the government took up the immunization program for the country, expanded program of immunization. So we took up the half of the country. Immunization program was added to our oral rehydration program. Our programs on oral rehydration and immunization had a big impact on infant mortality reduction. From 252 per thousand child deaths, now the under 5 deaths has come down to 75, in fact. It's better than India's under 5 mortality rate. So this immunization program and oral rehydration, which took us to every household in Bangladesh, gave us the confidence that we could in fact cover the entire country with whatever program we started. Before that, we were such kind of projects in different locations, and we thought that if we did very well, that will be replicated by government or somebody else, some other entities. But then we came to the conclusion that nobody is going to replicate us. It's us who is going to replicate ourselves. So whether it is in health or education or microfinance or agricultural development, we were confident that we could do it throughout the country. We also needed to develop the capacity within the organization to be able to train large numbers of people. So we have now 14 training centers. I felt that we couldn't have gone into 35,000 schools if we didn't have the training facilities first built up. The teachers are village women, high school education. We provide 15 days of training initially, and then we deploy them in teaching a class. But then we provide 2 visits every week by a supervisor who goes and checks her. So every 10 teachers, we have 1 supervisor. And then once a month, we get them in for a refresher course, 1 day. We find that most of the teachers that we have do far better than normal primary school teachers that the government has, who has probably more education, but then no supervision, no training. So we are quite happy with these paraprofessional teachers whom we train and deploy. In organizations such as BRAC, most of the activities are done in groups. The whole system in BRAC is developed in such a way that people have to work together to implement programs. And I think our training program in BRAC also provides the kind of skills needed to work together in groups. You also need management to manage larger numbers of people. So management development has to be done to develop young managers into taking more mature, more larger tasks. We have sent out a large numbers of our staff for training abroad, into doing MAs, PhDs, and so on, for postgraduate training. And we have also tried to develop NGO management and leadership training in Bangladesh. And we have an international program where others are coming from various countries to have a diploma course in Bangladesh, which we provide together with SIT, School of International Training in Vermont. And BRAC provides a diploma course in NGO management and leadership. The most important value that we try to transfer to BRAC staff is that every human being has got potential and can do a lot more things that we imagine. The poorest of the poor can do a lot more things that we are ready to give them credit for. So basically, a belief in human beings' ability to change and to act. That is the first thing that we try and inculcate. Then, of course, that all human beings are equal. Every human being is equal, whether it is man or woman, or whether it is poor or rich, whether it is educated and illiterate. Human equality is something that we try to inculcate through our training programs and also our various discussions and values that we practice within BRAC. One problem about being an NGO not having the kind of resources like a foundation, for example, is that you are dependent on funding from donors, and donor funding is never certain. So one has to be careful about expanding to a level where donor funding is no longer available, and suddenly you have to scale back your programs, which is very difficult and creates problems of confidence within the organization. But if you have been able to develop funding sources, resource mobilization within the organization, then of course it gives you the kind of confidence that even if donor funding were not available, you'll still be able to sustain in a significant way over the next few years. So I think sustainability issues are important for scaling up. I think donors also like the idea that the organization is not totally dependent on them. And they also like the idea that if the organization itself contributes to a program, they feel happier to contribute to it rather than totally funding a program themselves. So that's important. BRAC's budget, about 20% is financed by bilateral donors and multilateral donors, but the other 80% is generated within the country, and most of it actually comes from poor people. The biggest chunk comes from service charge for our microfinance program. Almost 50% of the funds actually come from them. And the rest of it comes from our businesses that we do, and also the service charge for various services that we provide to poor people. Microfinance we started in 1974, but initially our lending, credit and savings work was collective. We came to individual lending in 1978. In our microfinance program, we have got about 4 million borrowers. Historically, we have been receiving more than 98% of our money back. We are very cost conscious. We are also looking at surpluses created by our enterprises. There is a market perspective in everything, including even in development programs. You'll find that there is thinking about whether we want to do this at this cost or something alternative at that cost. These are being looked at all the time. We have service charge in BRAC for various services that we provide. So our extension workers who go and supervise these vegetable gardens, provide them service in terms of supplying of seeds and things like that, giving them advice what kind of fertilizer they should use. So it's a small sum of money, but we feel that the services we provide, if it is completely free, that they will not value the service so much. If we charge something, then of course we make our worker also accountable to the person who is being provided some service. We also have a small service charge for poor people coming to see our doctor. If it was completely free, then the doctor would not be held responsible for good practice. If they pay something, then they will demand better service from the doctor. So that's how we look at it. We do allow everybody to come into this health center. For our group members who are poor people, they pay a small fee of 10 taka to see a doctor and get medicine. But then if you are an outsider and can pay more, you are charged 20 taka. We found that almost 60 to 80% of our costs are recovered from fees. So we are still looking for 100% cost recovery in our community health centers. Once we have attained that, then of course we don't need to put in more money or seek more funding from donors and so on. Then we can go on expanding and then provide better service. I think ultimate goal would be to become self-financing so that we are not dependent on donors at all. But I think in the foreseeable future, I see that the donor money will be needed, and we will probably continue to have 10 to 20% of our funding from donors. I also think that there is an advantage of having some donors available for funding our programs. I think one good thing about donor funding is that the donors do bring in expertise. And I think the debate and discussions between experts coming from donor side together with our people, sometimes there is a learning, cross-learning happens. So it's a good discussion and debate that takes place, which enriches our program. We have a number of commercial ventures. We are trying to develop profits, but the profit itself goes into either education or healthcare or something, so profit doesn't go to anybody else. The idea is not only to serve these people, but also to generate an income which ultimately will support BRAC's development activities. We have something like 200,000 women who borrow money from us to buy cows, and many of them, find it difficult to sell milk. And so we set up this dairy plant so that their milk could be collected and we could market it in towns. And they could get a fair price for their milk. We are collecting milk from particularly depressed areas where milk prices are low because nobody is buying their milk. So we have got about 20 to 30 centers all over the country where we are collecting milk from. And then we bring them to Dhaka, and we have pasteurized milk, we have yogurt, we have got chocolate milk, and we have all kinds of other products with mango milk and so on. And we are also setting up a powder milk plant. The reason is your cows produce more milk during the winter than in the summertime, when almost a quarter of Bangladesh goes underwater. So you don't have much grassland available. So in these months, you can collect more milk than you can sell to customers. So during the scarce months, you can then mix it with milk and produce more milk. But then we also look at the whole question of the breed of cows that we have in Bangladesh. They seem to be very emaciated, producing very little milk. So we have been looking at improving breeds of cows. So we have got artificial insemination program going on. We have got about 1,000 centers. What I'd like to see in the next 10 to 15 years, Bangladesh's cow breed is going to be quite different from what it is today. We have 2 million women who are raising poultry in their households. They needed proper feed so that they get more eggs, they get fattened chicken so that they can sell it at a higher price. So we set up a feed mill. In fact, we have got 3 feed mills. Once we got into feeds, we looked at what Bangladesh produces. Best poultry feed, the main bulk of the cereal is maize. But Bangladesh didn't produce any maize. So we had to do it with wheat, which was not as good as maize. So in 1991, for the first time in Bangladesh, we imported 5 tons of maize seeds, hybrid seeds, from Australia, and gave it to farmers. And we said that, all right, you grow maize. If there is no market for your products, we'll buy all your maize at 6 taka per kilo. But none of them came to us. They could sell it at higher price. Next year, we imported 50 tons. And the next year, we got 200 tons. So next year, we thought that why do we import all these hybrid maize seeds ourselves? We go into joint venture with the Australians. So we produce about 700, 800 tons annually, 2/3 of Bangladesh's hybrid maize seeds. The reason we have done that is because if we didn't do this, ultimately our poultry industry will not grow. The maize has to be produced in this country at a low enough price so that we can compete with Thailand, Malaysia, who export poultry to Japan and France and so on. So we have looked at poultry not only in terms of poverty alleviation program for the poor women who was going to have 9 hens and 1 cock, but also industry as a whole. The poultry industry in Bangladesh is developing because the maize is now available in the countryside. The other area in poultry that we looked at was high mortality of poultry. Unless you are able to immunize poultry from various diseases that we have in the villages, it is a very uncertain kind of business. So one of our group members was trained as poultry vaccinator. 3 days of training, but then the essential element was that she will be linked to the livestock department of the government, who will provide her the vaccines. She will bring the vaccine to the village early in the morning so that she can vaccinate all the hens and cocks and then get paid for it. But cold chain maintenance is a problem. Vaccine has to be kept under a cold chain. So we devised a system, but that if she puts the vaccine in a ripe banana, it'll keep the temperature at the same level. The banana is a good insulator. So that's one area that we developed, and we had about 49,000 women who were trained in poultry vaccination. So that brought down the poultry mortality in the countryside. And then, of course, we started giving them hybrid hens and cocks. So instead of 60 eggs a year, you get 280 eggs a year. So that has improved dramatically, and also income in the villages. I think the most important program which didn't work, I suppose, is sericulture, silk production, which we have not succeeded yet in getting the kind of employment and income that we hoped sericulture would generate. We started in one area, and then it did quite well. We trained the silk worm rearers, the spinners and the weavers in an area where traditionally silk was not produced. So we felt that maybe throughout Bangladesh we could grow silkworms and grow mulberry trees, and then we could train women in silk worm rearing and spinning and weaving. So in 1990 we started planting mulberry trees throughout the country. From 1991 to 1995 we planted 25 million mulberry trees in 13,000 kilometers of roadside verges. And then we hired about 10,000 women to look after these trees. We provided them 90 kilograms of wheat per month, which was provided by WFP, World Food Program. We also started training women in silkworm rearing and spinning and weaving. But ultimately what happened, the program didn't succeed. In 1998 we had a big flood where almost 90% of the country was underwater. And the water was there for more than 30 days, and most of our silk mulberry plants was destroyed. But then there was another problem. China started dumping silk in Bangladesh and India and Thailand and so on at a very low price. But Chinese prices are going up right now, and we are hoping that if Chinese yuan is revalued, then the prices of Chinese silk will go up a bit further, and then our silk will become much more competitive. When we started silk production in one area of Bangladesh, we found that it was difficult to market products, silk products in rural areas. So we felt that a marketing outlet in Dhaka would be useful. So Arong was started. The basic idea was that craftspeople who find it very difficult to market their products in the villages has to be given not only money on delivery, but also in some cases training, and some cases designs. And then we felt that there needs to be a training and production center in rural Bangladesh where craftspeople could come and be trained and get into various kinds of occupations and activities. So Aisha Abed Foundation was created with a view to providing work for women in crafts, and also to provide designs and training services to them. So Aisha Abed Foundation and Arong work together. So something like 30,000 women work for Aisha Abed Foundation, and their production is marketed by Arong. Apart from the Aisha Abed Foundation and its craftspeople, there are also cooperatives throughout Bangladesh who come to Arong with their products. So this has been going on for the last 20 years. And Arong is doing exceedingly well. I think our total sale is something like $25 million. Bragg as a brand is well respected in Bangladesh. It's throughout the country. People know the name Bragg. And so the brand name Bragg is quite important. So whenever we produce anything, let's say poultry feed, it is very well accepted. People think that the Bragg is not going to mix anything other than the most nutritious food for poultry. And Arong name is also very well respected, but then Arong is restricted to the urban areas. For example, you will find that our milk is branded as Arong because most of our milk is marketed in cities. and city people know Arong. But when we are producing now iodized salt, salt is going to go everywhere throughout the country. So we have branded that as Brack salt. So Brack and Arong brand is used by Brack all the time. They're very useful. Brack has gone into joint ventures with other companies. For example, about 10 years ago, we set up the Delta Brack Housing Finance. When Brack wanted to do housing finance, we felt that we should get some companies who has got interest in this line. So we got two insurance companies, the Green Delta Insurance Company and Delta Life Insurance Company, to be our partner. And we also got IFC, the World Bank's corporate affiliates, who invest money in companies, to be an investor in that enterprise. So that is now the biggest housing finance corporation in Bangladesh. We have also gone into other companies, like we have got a company which is with Concord Builders. We have got Brack Concord Lands Limited, where we are trying to buy land and we want to provide housing for middle class and lower middle class people and poor people in city areas. International partnerships, we have joint ventures with Australia for producing maize seeds. And these are hybrid maize seeds that we are extending in Bangladesh. We also got a joint venture with China on hybrid rice. The Chinese are working with us here in Bangladesh in producing hybrid rice seeds. And we have been doing it for the last 3 or 4 years. And hopefully over the next few years we will be producing enough seeds to meet the needs of Bangladesh. Bangladesh produces only 2% of our rice is in hybrids. We are hoping in the next 10 years it should go up to about 30%. And then the production will grow by something like 20% with hybrid rice than the normal HYB rice. Then we have got the social development, which is basically providing human rights and legal education to all of our group members. We provide legal services for all kinds of disputes that occur in the countryside, particularly the poor people who need legal aid support from Brack. And also we provide rural drama. We do a lot of folk drama in the villages to put across ideas on gender issues, women's exploitation, things like that, which seems to work well. Through a drama you can put across an idea. If you talk for hundreds of hours, that doesn't have the same kind of impact. So we have hundreds of groups of folk players who go from countryside to countryside and stage drama on issues that we think is important to be able to transmit. Last week I saw a folk play on HIV/AIDS, and they're wonderful. In Bangladesh we don't have a big problem yet, but we are trying to get people aware of the dangers of AIDS infection, what kind of things they need to do now in order to protect themselves from AIDS infection. There are two areas that I'd like to reflect on. One is that you try and serve poor people as much as you can directly. But then you also realize that there are other entities like the government of Bangladesh who also needs to serve their citizens. So what we felt that if you can create demand by organizing your people, then the demand has to be met by the system. In the sense that if there is a demand for health services, and if you can organize people, and they demand services from the state. What was needed also, that the government to become responsive, you also needed to help them to become responsive. Let me give you an example. We are creating demand in the countryside for primary education. We are trying to get all children into primary schools. But in many primary schools, you'll find that there is no classrooms. The number of teachers is much less than what is needed. So we are also trying to help the government now to train teachers, to deploy them. So what I'm saying is that we need to work at both ends. The vaccines for poultry, not only that the demand was created from the field, but the government's ability to respond needed to be helped. In other words, we had to help the government to produce more vaccines. We had to ensure that the vaccines were reaching the livestock officer's fridge. So we also tried to help them. And then cold chain maintenance. The fridges were not working. So what do? If you left it to them, it will take them 6 months to get the sanction from the government to repair the fridge. So we had our own fridge repair team to go and help the livestock department fridge to work. So in a way, what we try to do is creating demand in the countryside and also trying to help the system, in other words, the government system, to be able to respond effectively to it. So both things were needed in Bangladesh. The government of Bangladesh obviously has provided the kind of space for us to expand our programs in such a way that we become a large institution. In all societies, governments are keen not to get institutions which are as large as BRAC. In India, for example, there is hardly any institution even quarter the size of BRAC, simply because the government hasn't provided enough space for NGOs to grow to an extent that they would match or even surpass the size of governmental institutions. I have always felt that BRAC needs to do things when the government is unable to function effectively in a particular area. But when the government is able to provide the right kind of service to our people, for example, if all children were in school in the government schools, and if they are getting meaningful learning, then I don't see why BRAC should be remaining in providing primary education to our children. It's like a Bailey Bridge. You build the Bailey Bridge when there's no other bridge available. When the big bridge is built, then the Bailey Bridge is removed. So we are looking for the big bridge provided by the state. When they are able to do that, then we don't need our Bailey Bridges to support our people. It is important in order to bring about large-scale change in a society, you need to work together with national systems. But then one has to be very astute about this, seize opportunities whenever this comes about. Most NGOs find it very difficult to work with governments. But again, if you don't work with governments, the large-scale change is difficult to bring about. So whenever possible, it is imperative that non-governmental organizations or social entrepreneurs try and work with their systems in such a way that larger scale impact can be had from their work. It is a challenge in the sense that not all government departments accept that you could provide some support and help to them. So basically one needs to work with the ministries and departments which accept your support. For example, the secondary education department has given us freedom to try and help them in training better teachers and so on. But primary education is more closed, so we are not being able to work very closely with the primary school system. So this happens in all ministries. I mean, in family planning we worked very well. With health we didn't. In agriculture we are working quite well, but irrigation program we are not working very well. So it depends on the responses from each ministry and their personnel in the ministry and so on. So in many cases it's individuals who decide whether to open themselves up to NGO participation in their capacity building and so on. If you look at BRAC programs, there are large numbers of volunteers who work in BRAC programs in the field, particularly volunteers from the community. The poor people that we serve, they volunteer a lot of time and energy for a lot of different activities that BRAC has brought them into. There are some 50,000 women who volunteer as poultry vaccinator. There are some 40,000 Shastha Shebikas, which are our rural health workers, who are women. So there are large numbers of people who work in BRAC as a volunteer. And they volunteer because this gives them satisfaction in serving their own community. There is some financial benefit, but there is also the status that comes from volunteering in a particular activity. I believe that human civilization is the cumulative actions of all men in a society, in any society. It's not just one individual or one political leader who will be judged. It is all of our actions. You can contribute to your society, your community by doing many different things. You could be a bureaucrat, you could be a public servant, and if you can do a very good job, then you serve your society. As a professor in a university, you serve your society. As an artist, as a dramatist, as a writer, you can serve your society. So my son, for example, he wants to go into politics. He thinks that his dad has worked all these years and really hasn't changed Bangladesh that much. So he wants to go into politics and change societies. It's all of us put together, and our actions will be judged as what we are. It is the cumulative actions of all our people.
In the early 1970s, the newly independent country of Bangladesh was reeling under the effects of war, flood, and famine. Fazl Hassan Abed organized a relief effort that was quickly transformed into something very different.
We came to the conclusion that relief and rehabilitation is not going to be enough. It has to be a long-term commitment to development. People were poor and going to remain poor unless we bring about change.
Abed understood that one does not simply develop people. People must develop themselves. Through the Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee, now simply known as BRAC, he has enabled millions of people to break away from poverty.
Poor people are poor because they are powerless. You must organize people for power. They must organize themselves in such a way that they can change their lives.
In this program, Abed shares his story, and that of BRAC, as it has grown from a small group of dedicated staff members to a giant non-government organization of over 4 million members, which continues to be a guiding light for all who take on the task of global development.
At that time, there was a Brazilian educator named Paulo Freire, whose book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, was published in 1973. And I think early in 73, I read that book. His thesis was that the poor people are poor because they are powerless. You must organize people for power. They must organize themselves in such a way. They must understand the dynamics of their communities in such a way that they can change their lives. So that book sort of provided a theoretical framework for us to try and develop people for power. So we set up a whole 100 lessons in which we sort of started building self-worth in people. And through that process, you build self-confidence that they can change their condition and they don't have to live in poverty and degradation forever. We go into a village, a field worker, we call him a program organizer. He goes into a village and organizes maybe half a dozen people, maybe 15 or 16 people, and say that you form a group, and then you bring in more people till you are about 30 to 40, and then a village group is in existence. And then once we have got this 40 people in a village organization, we call them, then we start other programs like saving starts even before the group is complete. But once the group is complete, then of course we'll provide credit. We'll also provide some training programs like legal education so that they understand their rights and obligations. In each village we have 1, 2 or 3 groups of 40 women. So about 10 groups to 1 PO. And in average area office, I think we have got about 20 POs. The 20 POs will look after about 200 groups. 200 multiplied by 40, it could be as many as about 8,000. So area office will cover about 7,000 to 8,000 group members. So you replicate throughout the country and you have 4.5 million groups.
The Millennium Development Goals are an unprecedented effort to attack worldwide poverty simultaneously on many fronts.
Any development organization working for poverty alleviation and empowerment of the poor needs to really work on many different issues.
BRAC, formerly the Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee, founded by Fazl Hassan Abed, has employed a multi-pronged strategy to attack poverty on a national level. BRAC's work has helped Bangladesh make significant strides.
In 1974-75, Bangladesh's fertility per woman was 6.5, and now nationally it's about 3. Life expectancy at birth in 1975 was 49, now it's 61.
Abed shares BRAC's experience in tackling such goals as establishing universal primary education, promoting gender equality, reducing child mortality, improving maternal health, and alleviating poverty. He offers a valuable roadmap to all those engaged in the struggle to reach these critically important goals.
I think the Millennium Development Goal is a good goal to work towards. Most of the goals or targets set is achievable, I think. And in Bangladesh, I think we will try and achieve all of it, all the goals. The first one, of course, is education of children, whether we could get all children into school and get them to complete primary education. We felt that if we ultimately had to improve productivity in this country, we needed to get our children educated for the next generation to be able to compete effectively in the globalized market. We have one group which is 8 to 10. We take them into primary schools and provide them 4 years of education, which covers 5 years of primary schooling. And then we have got another group, mostly girls, but some boys, 10 years to 14 years. Those children who, for whatever reasons, have not had the opportunity to have an education. Since they are older children, we provide them 3 years of education to cover 5 years of curriculum. And they can do that. Most of them complete 5 years of primary schooling in 3 years. So we have got these two groups of children who come to our schools. The reason for these schools are that there are many children who don't enroll themselves into any primary school. So we wanted to mop up these children who has never had an opportunity to go to a primary school. So that was one. And secondly, we also found there's a large number of children who went into a primary school, enrolled themselves, but then dropped out without any meaningful learning. So we felt that we also needed to provide them a second chance so that they have an access to education, at least primary level education. The reason we call our school system non-formal primary schools is because if we said they were primary schools, the government has got a particular rule as to how many classes you must have, how many teachers you must have, you must adopt the government curriculum. So we felt that we would be outside the government system. We wanted to experiment with new ways of teaching, learning. We needed to develop new curriculum, new materials. So we called our schools non-formal. But then if you look at the structure of our schools, they are more formal than the formal schools in the sense that the classes start, particular time is finishes, teachers come on time, there is a structure of teaching, learning, subjects are taught every day. There are 270 days a year that the classes take place. In most government schools, probably in less than 200 days classes are held. But we call it non-formal simply because we didn't want to abide by all the rules that is set for a primary school. We set up these schools in each village with 30 children and one teacher. We thought that these children would be quite happy receiving 5 years of primary education. But we were taken aback, quite surprised, when we found that 90% of our children who completed primary schools actually went on to high school. We expanded to 35,000 schools. And we have 1.2 million children in our schools. We ourselves fund about 350 NGOs to run BRAC-type schools. So I think it has been adopted in Bangladesh quite well. But in Bangladesh, if you look at the statistics, there are 19 million children in the age group of 6 and 10. Approximately 3 million children are out of school right now, still not going to school. So if we had more resources, I think we could have had 100,000 schools and mopped up all the children who are out of school presently. So because we don't have the resources we need, we can't expand to that level.
Ashoka, Innovators for the Public, is a global organization that searches out and supports social entrepreneurs, men and women who use entrepreneurial vision and skills to attack and solve social problems.
We're only talking about people who cannot come to rest until their vision has become the new pattern society-wide.
Ashoka is a community of over 1,500 social entrepreneurs, plus staff members, partners, and volunteers in over 50 countries who work together to create widespread, long-lasting change. Bill Drayton is its founder.
You got to have a vision that's going to change the field. You've got to be equally concerned with the how-tos. How do you get from here to there?
In this program, Bill Drayton describes how social entrepreneurs think and act, how the burgeoning field of social entrepreneurship is making a profound impact on millions of lives, and how everyone can contribute to its growth.
The entrepreneur and the idea are so closely tied together that the life cycle of an idea and the entrepreneur is very hard to separate. Now, of course, an entrepreneur can live beyond the launch of an idea. Similarly, the idea can live long after the entrepreneur. Jean Monnet, I think, was the second most brilliant person of the last century. He was responsible for the unification of Europe. His basic dynamic in Europe, idea, institution, stronger idea, next institution, more momentum and credibility for the idea. He died in 1979. That dynamic is still going on. And that's his core genius, in my mind, is setting that dynamic in place. So the person and the idea are married, but especially once you get beyond this stage of defining and figuring out how to make it work at scale, then they can have independent lives. One of the Ashoka Fellows in Brazil saw that half the people in a relatively rich state, Rio Grande do Sul, had no electricity in the rural areas. He wanted to change that. So he developed a new approach to rural electrification that cut the cost 70 to 90%. And then he went to work to change it. And he had to talk to the engineering firms and get financing structured and so on. That's changed the lives of way over 1 million people and spreading. He's now focusing on how do you get solar energy into the hands of people who are not wealthy. And there are hundreds of millions of people across the world who can benefit from that. J.B. Schramm, right here in Washington, was one of the first U.S. Ashoka Fellows. He has a very simple idea, but one that will have a big impact. He went to college. Most of his classmates didn't. That bothered him because he knew that they were just as smart, and he thought this was wrong, a big waste. He had parents who went to college. They didn't. This is not what should make the difference. Classic for an entrepreneur, he kept that idea in his mind's eye. He kept thinking about it, looking at it, feeling his way to an answer. He had to find an answer that would be low cost and simple and a big win for all the actors. Classic entrepreneur's criteria. He set up something called College Summit. And the way it works, he takes a peer group of high school students from families that do not have college backgrounds, and they spend 4 or 5 days at a college summit on a nearby campus. College is demystified. They're challenged from the first moment to think about their lives, to articulate the strengths of what they've done, to write the essays for getting into college. They're talking with people who are role models. He then works with the homeroom teachers. Now, this works. 80% of the kids go, 80% graduate. Now, this is a very simple idea, but it has to be implemented. And he's now at the stage of moving it out across the country. That's a social entrepreneur at work.
Grameen Bank is best known for bringing the power of microfinance to over 4 million poor women in Bangladesh. But it has also created more than 24 other ventures.
Whether non-profit or for-profit, our involvement relates to benefiting to the poor people.
Muhammad Yunus, Grameen Bank's founder, describes why and how Grameen has launched enterprises in areas as diverse as textiles, cell phone technology, and healthcare. He shares the valuable lessons he has learned in finding new ways to give Grameen's members even greater access to opportunity and power.
We need a very different structure, different framework, different reference points. We would be judged by our own achievements.
Dr. Yunus sees a global need for a new kind of capitalism, one that puts people in need first. He demonstrates how economic viability can magnify the impact of social ventures. And he describes the support systems needed to allow this new model of capitalism to reach its vast potential.
Since capitalism is narrowly interpreted, socially conscious people don't want to get involved in business because that's uninteresting for them. That's not what we want. We don't want to make money. We want to do something else. So they are outside the business purview. I'm saying if you open it up, a lot of people will gradually come in, particularly young people who are looking for things to do in the world, contribute in the world, and solve problems of the world. They will dream of becoming a social business entrepreneurs, and the facilities has to be created so that they become social business entrepreneur. And I'm talking about even creating departments. There are business schools producing MBAs. There will be a social business program in the business school which will be creating social MBAs. And then you need another institution to make it happen, like you have the stock markets. And the existing stock market, people go there to make more money, as simple as that. You don't go there for charity. So if I want to do good to people in a business way, I have nowhere to go. So I said, why don't we create a completely separate stock exchange where all the companies which are doing good to people, the social business enterprises, will be listed. It could be women's empowerment, it could be street children, it could be drinking water, it could be arsenic problem in some place, it could be pollution problem in another place, it could be healthcare program in some place, it could be health insurance for poor people, whatever. There's 101 and 1,001 ideas that you can bring and run those things in a business way, provided the investors who would like, I cannot run a company like that, but I would like to invest in one. I have the money and I can spend it. If we have to run a social business enterprise right now, we run into a lot of problems because we have not set up supportive institutions alongside. So we would be depending a lot more on the old institutions, and they will be at each stage questioning our norms, or they will not understand our performance statistics and so on. If you are not making profit, why should I come and support you? Why should I lend money to you? You are not making any profit. How are you going to pay us back? But doesn't mean that you have to be out of the market completely. It means that you are the first one to venture into new territory and you lead the way and others will follow you and create institutions. This is how the pioneers always did. Be the first one, stick the neck out and make it happen. Luckily, already if you look around the world, there are many, many, more than we can think, are social business entrepreneurs. So there will be initial problems, but if it sticks, if it grows, you can create your own world.